In this section today, we're going to talk about just some admin-related back-to-school tasks to help you get set up ready for the new academic year. And some of these things you may have done already, but just good to go through these things and highlight some. So there have been a few changes this year, which I wanted to talk about in particular. So let's get stuck straight in, looking at license management first of all. And really here, just want to talk about the recent licensing changes with Google Workspace for Education fundamentals, but also some reminders about best ways of managing your Education Plus licenses as well. So I'm going to jump over to my admin console now. And when looking at licensing on a domain, I always start by going into billing and subscriptions. And this gives us a high-level overview then of how many licenses we have, how many are assigned, and we can see all this information here. So on this domain, so it's a very small school domain, this one. I've only got a small number of users, but I can see here I've got 36 education fundamentals licenses assigned. And this license, you might remember previously, it's always been there, but it's not something we ever had to worry about before because all users received this license and there's no way of removing this license. Whereas earlier this year, Google have changed this now so that you have a finite number of those licenses available. So in this domain, I've got 2,500. But the other change alongside that, which I'll talk about more in a minute, is we also now have a Gmail-only license and archived user license. But just a reminder, every user who's using Google Workspace on your domain must have a fundamentals license. If you don't assign this, they won't have access to Google Apps and you'll get some very unpredictable results with that user. So key thing, always make sure you've got that license assigned. And the easiest way to do that is if we go into our licensing settings down here, and then I'm going to select my top level OU and just make sure I've got automatic licensing configured for education fundamentals. So that any user being created gets that license. You can also do something similar as well with your Education Plus licenses. So for instance, for my staff OU down here, I might want to actually set this up so my staff automatically receive an Education Plus license. And that's what turns on the premium paid for features you've purchased. So really important to make sure all of your active users get one of those, get your Education Plus license, as well as your fundamentals license. So if you're using Education Plus, you still need a fundamentals license. So just really wanted to highlight that. So I had a few questions about that recently. Now, when it comes to auditing licenses, you can do a lot from the admin console. So for instance, if I wanted to see everyone who has an Education Plus license on my domain, if I click into here, I can actually select this where it says 23 assigned, and this will take me to the users page, and then I can see which users have an Education Plus license. And I can see, looking down at this list, I do have a few users who are suspended and still have an Education Plus license. So what I'd recommend doing in these cases is revoking that license as well. Now, if you had a lot of users, and I don't have too many here, but if you did, a quick way of doing this is just downloading this page into a Google Sheet. So selecting the currently filtered list of users and exporting that into a Google Sheet. And then you get a whole list of all users on your domain who have got that license type. And then you can quickly filter and see who exactly does still have an Education Plus license. Cool. When it comes to licensing, you can also use GAM as well to help you. But actually, before we get into that, just something to talk about with onboarding and offboarding users. So when it comes to users leaving your organization, I highly recommend having a dedicated leavers OU to move your users into. This just makes things like license management and making sure those accounts are suspended and disabled a bit easier to manage. Now, just going back to this page, first of all, a useful tip: if you download this information into a Google Sheet, so this time I'm going to download all user information and all user columns as well. Let's hit download here and take us into Sheets. And a useful trick is you can use a pivot table to quickly see where all of your active and suspended users are on your domain to make sure you've got a tidy and organized OU structure there. So here's a list of my users. Let's insert a pivot table now. There it is. And create a new sheet. And let's add in a row for each org unit and columns for user status, wherever that is. There it is. Okay, so, and let's add in values, of course. So now I'll get a really quick, just make this a bit bigger for you, a quick overview of all of my OUs, which just contain users. And for each of those OUs, I can see how many active users I've got, how many archived users, but also notice here, I do have some suspended users in some of my active user OUs. So I'd want to then go in and find those users, make sure, are they supposed to be suspended? If so, I need to get them out into a leavers OU just to keep that all much tidier. And that comes in useful then when we're wanting to manage our licenses. So I've mentioned one way of managing licenses via the admin console and using the license settings to auto assign licenses for us. And this is great, but it doesn't actually remove those licenses. So we still need to manage that task ourselves. Now we can either go into a user directly and manage it from this particular user. So if I wanted to go and manage Charlie's licenses, I could do that from here and go down into licenses, but not very practical in bulk. So you can use GAM to help us with managing this process. Now, you can do it individually, but doing it on bulk with GAM, a useful trick is either to use a CSV file. So get that CSV file you've exported from your Google Sheet, or you can use GAM to query an OU for you. So in this instance, I've got a GAM command here to print all users in a particular OU. So this is just going to return all the users I've got in my leavers OU. But the nice thing that you can do with GAM is you can actually chain these commands together. So I could start with my print command here to find all users in a particular OU. And then I could pipe that information through to another GAM command. So in this case, I'm piping this information and treating it like a CSV file being returned by GAM, and then telling GAM to update each user and to, sorry, I just realized I'm sharing my wrong screen here. Here's the correct screen. Update each user and update it so that we are going to turn suspended on. So if I run this now, that's going to suspend all of my users in the leavers OU, which is highlighted here. Now, I mentioned the archive license earlier. So suspending users is fine, but it's still going to consume one of our fundamentals licenses. So what's actually better to do now is, rather than suspending users, I would recommend archiving your users. It's the same end result. The user can't access their account anymore, they can't access their data, but the benefit of archiving those users is it swaps the fundamentals license for an archived user license. So to show that now, if I go back into my admin console and have a look under the leavers OU, and let's select Percy Weasley, finally left school, and down here under my licenses, I can now see he's got the archived license, freeing up more of our fundamentals licenses for our active users. So highly recommend archiving now. Great, so I think that's everything I wanted to share on licensing management. And also just to mention, really good idea to just get maybe an export of recent leavers from your student information system and just compare that against what you've got in the admin console, and also do the same for staff from your HR system, just to make sure everyone who has left has been suspended and handled properly there. So do check that. Okay, on to Google Classroom now. So a few things on Google Classroom I'd recommend checking, starting with just your high-level classroom permissions on your domain. So if we go into Apps and Classroom, first thing I recommend checking here is who can actually create classes. Because some domains, this is a bit too open. So like on this domain, anyone in my domain can currently create a class. I always recommend setting this to verified teachers only. Okay, and to verify a teacher, you need to make sure that they are in the classroom teachers group. So for any new teachers joining your school this year, you'll want to make sure that they have been added into this classroom teachers group. so that they can create classes, but also make sure they've got an Education Plus license, because otherwise they're not going to be able to use all of the features you've got in Google Classroom, and also certain features like Guardian access, only available if you've got an Education Plus license, Classroom add-ons, things like originality reports, YouTube interactive questions, and many other Classroom features are reliant on having that Education Plus license. So do make sure that's assigned. You might also want to review your class settings down here, just to make sure that only users in your domain can join and access classes. So for instance, again, this domain, it's a bit too open. So I'd recommend setting this down to users in your domain only and classes in your domain only, to make sure your classes are only accessed by users on your domain, and you don't have students joining classes in other domains. So good to make sure that's set up as well. Now, one of the questions we did talk about briefly earlier was best practices in bulk creating and archiving classes. So a few solutions we mentioned were GAM, if you want a free solution, AppsEDU as well, but a bit more technical. You need to create those scripts, or a third-party tool which we can provide called ClassLink, which is really powerful and automates that whole process for you, so you don't need to worry about it. But if you did want to use GAM, I'm just going to share a few GAM commands with you now and show you how you can do this. So for instance, if you wanted to maybe get a list of what classes a user is a member of, you could use a GAM command like this. So type in GAM print courses teacher followed by the username here, and then this will give me a list of all of my courses. Bit hard to read it on the screen, so what we can do is add to Drive, and that will then export that into a Google Sheet for us, and then we can go through and just make sure all these classes are correct and don't need to be archives, or make sure there's none missing there. But you can also use GAM to bulk create classes as well. So firstly, if I just wanted to create a single class, I could type in GAM create course. I could give this an alias, so this could be the class code, which I can then use to track that. Let's just make it that, and I can give this a name. So let's call this computer science. And then we need to also tell Google Classroom who the primary teacher is going to be for that class, because every class needs to have a teacher. Let's just make that myself and hit create. And a few moments later, we should see a new class being created. But I could also adapt this to use a CSV file. Unfortunately, I didn't prepare a CSV file to hand, but if I did want to do this via a CSV file, what I would do is firstly upload my CSV file into my Google Cloud Shell, which is where I've got GAM installed, and then type in GAM CSV followed by the CSV file name. So let's just make this up and call it classes, and then we tell GAM what command we want to run for each row in that CSV file. So exactly the same as the command above, but we're going to use some variables, some column headers this time, to pull this data in. So let's specify column headers now. Always put these in double quotes, and my mind's going blank. What's that character? Is that a tilde? I think it is. Been on holiday. And then as a class name, and then we can provide the teacher information as well. And again, we can pull that in from our column header. And then if you've got a CSV file, export from your student information system with all the new classes to create, you could quickly do that using GAM. And the same principle for archiving classes as well. When it comes to archiving a class, let's just close that. What you would do in that case is type in so GAM course, I think update, or is it update course, and then set the archived attribute on. And archiving a class doesn't delete that class, it just hides it from the teacher and student view. The teacher can still access it by going into the archive section in Classroom, so all that student work is still there, but just hides it from a student view and keeps things much tidier. Yeah, and I'll share a slide deck at the end here as well, but I've got a few GAN commands here as well for managing classroom to help you get started with that. Okay, also at the beginning of the academic year, and at any time of year really, I recommend just reviewing your Google Workspace security settings. There's just 3 settings I wanted to highlight today, which are all really important. So let's start with looking at your password policy on Google Workspace. So you can get this by going into security, authentication, and password management. And in here, so currently my password policy for this domain is a bit weak. What we could do to make this stronger is, let's just start with our staff OU, but actually I've already done it on this OU. I've set this to enforce strong passwords. So I highly recommend enforcing that. That just stops users using any weak and easily guessable passwords. Upping the character limit, particularly for staff users, I'd recommend a minimum of either 12 or 14 characters there. And when you make these changes, a good box to tick is this one: enforce password policy and next sign in. So then any users who aren't compliant with that policy will then be reprompted to set a new password. But any users who are compliant won't be bothered. They will just continue as normal. So highly recommend doing that. I would disallow password reuse and don't worry about expiring passwords. Just force change a password if a password does become compromised. But forcing periodic changes is much older, kind of outdated guidance. It's generally recommended not to do that now. But of course, we don't want to just rely on passwords. Really important to have 2-step verification as well, particularly for your staff users or any other users who have access to sensitive data or could be a target for phishers. So to configure 2-step verification for your domain, let's select our staff OU. It's currently enabled for staff, but I've not got any enforcement set up here currently. So what I would do if I was just introducing this on my domain is I would say to turn it on from a particular date. So let's give our users a few weeks notice. Let's turn it on from the 8th of September. So then until this date, users will receive an automated notification when they sign into Google that they need to enroll in 2-step verification. But if they've not done it by this date, they will be locked out. So be warned. Good idea to contact your users to let them know that this is coming. Otherwise, if they don't set it up, they will be locked out. Also, a good idea to set up a new user grace period. So if new staff are joining after this enrollment date, they get a couple of weeks to also get this configured before 2-step verification is enforced. I generally allow users to trust the device. It kind of balances usability and security by not making 2-step verification too onerous. But I would remove this option, changing it from any to any method apart from texts and calls, just because text messages and phone calls aren't particularly secure. But what it does leave open to you is you can either use a device passkey. So if your device has got an up-to-date security chip, whether it's Windows, Mac or Chromebook, you could use that device and biometrics available on that device for your 2-step method. You could use a Google Authenticator app. You could use a yes/no prompts in your phone. You could use a physical security key. So plenty of other methods available, but I would disallow these 2 in particular. But when it comes to auditing this in your domain, good report to check is to go into reporting and go into user reports and security. And in here, we can see lots of security metrics, including 2-step verification, enrollment, and enforcement. So I can add a filter onto here and then find out very quickly. Let's find out who has enrolled in 2-step verification on this domain. I can see several users have enrolled in 2-step verification. I could also filter this by OUs if I wanted to see which users are my staff OU, or my environmental account, so I can see who exactly has done that. You can just then export this and then do a message out to users who haven't enrolled in 2-step verification for some targeted comms and reminders there. Okay, so we talked about password policies and 2-step verification. The last security feature I just wanted to touch on quickly is third-party app access. So this is a good one to review in your admin console. We've talked about this a number of times before, but really useful to revisit this at the beginning of the academic year. We can access it by going into security, access and data control, and API controls. And in here, if we go into manage app access, we can see what apps have been configured for our domain, but also what apps are being accessed on our domain. And this sorts it by the most used app. So this is a really small domain, so don't have very many here. But here you can see at a glance, what apps you've got listed. We can see the type of app, whether it's a web app or a mobile app, whether it's an internal app or a third-party app. We can see what services it's requesting, and whether it's configured or not. So in this instance, if I click on the Mail Merge app, it's an internal app that someone's created. I can see that it's trying to access the Google Drive scope. So recommend going through this list, just making sure that all the apps you've got listed here under your accessed apps are apps you want your users to be using. If they are not, so if you wanted to block one of these, such as I'm sure I saw Epic Games listed here somewhere earlier, it's not there now. Let's take NVIDIA, for example. Let's change this access. I don't think students should be accessing NVIDIA's cloud gaming service in this instance. So let's change this over to being blocked so that users can no longer access that across our domain. Okay, I need to re-authenticate. It's been a couple of hours since I signed in. Another useful report I just wanted to highlight quickly is if you want to get more granular information about who exactly is accessing this app, do make use of the investigation, and in particular use OAuth log events. And this records every third-party app and API call to that app in here, and it lists it by user. So if I just do a quick search here, it will show me all recent apps used by my users. And the useful trick here is I could actually, if I just wanted to find out what apps I've used, for instance, if I go to filter by user and type in my username, then if I just group these results by the application name, then gives me a really quick high-level overview of different apps in operation on my domain which are accessing my account. So I can see here SysCloud, licensing, GAM, signature tool, and a few others, Bitly. So really useful report to use. Okay, last slide now. So just we talked about this briefly when Bogdan was sharing the Gemini updates earlier, but I just wanted to show you where your service control settings live for both Gemini and Notebook LM, and make sure if you do want it on for students, how to turn it on, but if you don't want it on for students, then how you can turn that off. So unlike other Google services, which are all listed under apps, the AI services from Google all live under generative AI. And in here, we've got access to the Gemini app. So this is where we can control access to this service. So if I go into Gemini app, click on service status, I can see it's on for everyone, but actually I might want to turn it off for some of my younger students. So maybe the middle, maybe year 0 and year 1 shouldn't have Gemini access yet. So I could turn that off in here, but leave it on for others if I wish. And of course, I can do the same for Notebook LM as well. So under Notebook LM, service status, again, currently on for everyone. But just as before, I could go into here and update it for my year 0 students and turn that off as well. So do check that and review that on your domain just to make sure that's all configured as you want it to be. Another new service which Google introduced not too long ago is Google Vids. Again, Google Vids has its own control as well, but this one lives under Drive and Docs and Google Vids. And in here, you can enable or disable Google Vids for your users. Really useful service. So be interesting to see if anyone's used Google Vids today. But yeah, really useful tool. So I would recommend turning this one on, but it might be some users who might want to disable it for, but yeah, you can manage that all within this interface. If you're managing IT in education, then please do check out our playlist for more Google IT admin videos. But when it comes to keeping your school safe and secure, videos aren't always enough. Our security audit and remote admin services enables you and your IT teams to focus on what matters most. This service includes a direct chat space with us where you can ask questions about Google Workspace and get our expert advice and guidance, particularly on priority issues. We're always happy to jump on a Google Meet and help you resolve that problem. Our service also includes a full, comprehensive security audit every year, ensuring your domain is safe and secure and free from cyber threats. So if you want more details and would like to get started, then please do click on the link in the video description now. Thanks for watching.